Hi, I'm Mary, a librarian and book reviewer with a focus on stories written for kids, tweens, and teens. Today I am joined by Rebecca E.F. Barone, who's an engineer who's worked on a diverse array of projects. Realizing her love for books in addition to numbers, she now describes the world with words rather than equations. She has written about Antarctica, the Enigma cipher, and the eruption of Mount St. Helens, in addition to her newest book about spies. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for having me, Mary. It's great to talk to you today.
Could you tell us a little bit about your new book, Double Crossed?
Sure. Okay, so the Double Cross, this is Double Cross, the World War II Spies Who Saved D-Day. And I love looking at history from like a kind of a different perspective. So everyone knows D-Day, right? That's when the Allies really started to make inroads into Europe. That was their big push to take Europe back from Hitler. But not a lot of people know that Hitler actually was not expecting them where they landed. He was expecting them hundreds of miles to the east. And that was all because of the spies and this like huge deception campaign that the Allies had set up ahead of time. So they used everything from like physical decoys, like fake airplanes. They created fake runways, fake airports, fake barges and landing craft, to this really elaborate set of stories that these spies, went through German intelligence. They were double crossed. So the Germans thought that these spies were working for them when really they were working for the Allies. And so this is all about how that deception campaign, which is called Operation Bodyguard, was run and how it got started.
What was your inspiration for writing this book?
Yeah, yeah. So I really do like taking, well-known history events and looking at them through a little bit of a different angle. And so my publisher and I had been talking, my editor and I had been talking about different World War II stories coming off of, like you mentioned, writing Enigma and Unbreakable. And that was really interesting, getting to see how those codes were used and how those codes were broken. And again, kind of some of the lesser known stories that, you don't normally think of with World War II. And so I had come across this in an adult book, actually. So Operation Bodyguard, I learned about it through reading adult nonfiction. And I, told my editor and I said, this would make a really good kid story too. And he thought so too. And so that's kind of the genesis of how it came out.
That's so great. I
Mhm.
love also when you are writing nonfiction, you're putting real events into a format that's really accessible and it's readable and it's exciting and it's all true.
Yeah.
How is it that you put all of your research into a format that reads more like fiction, even though it's not?
Yeah, I think that part of it is research. A lot of it is you can't say something that's not true. So the idea that you have to have the research to back up whatever you want to say. It's also kind of highlighting the things that aren't normally highlighted in research. I think typically when we think of nonfiction, we think of it as very numbers based, how many people and where were they and what were they doing, and very, very cut and dry. But if you look into it with any amount of, depth, you realize that there is emotion behind it too, and there's setting, and the people are, they're humans. They're always growing and changing, as characters would in a book. So it's really a matter of going a little bit deeper than I think most people do when they just research a topic. That surface level of research, it's very easy to find who was where, when, and what were they doing. But you have to kind of do it with a desire to find out feelings and emotions and personality. And once you have that, I mean, that's what fictional characters do too. When you do develop a fiction backstory, you're always looking at their motivation and you're always looking at how they're changing, and who they are and who they're interacting with. And so if you ask those same questions during your research for nonfiction, you can write a book in largely the same way.
Oh, that's really fascinating. So, World War II, we have a lot of information, but the information about these spies, it seems unusual to me that there would be so much information available about them. Where did it all come from? Why do we have this information?
Yeah, you would think that spies would be a lot tighter lipped than they were. I think during the war, most of them didn't say anything. But after the war, I always think back to the earlier book that I wrote about Enigma, where after the war, anyone who worked on the codes really didn't talk about it for the rest of their lives until, very recently in the 1990s, even in the 21st century, these stories started to come out. The spies in Double Cross weren't like that. I mean, we have one of the spies keeping a wartime journal and then publishing it in the 1950s. We have the other spies writing their memoirs in the decades just after. And so, for whatever reason, these spies were very willing to talk about their experiences. And so I have this host of great primary resources where, I don't have to wonder what they were thinking and feeling because, their journal is telling me what they were thinking and feeling in that moment on that day. And even the recollections very soon after the war. So I got really lucky in terms of the resources that I had from the people themselves in the book.
Yeah, well, and that comes through in the writing as well. You really feel like you're there with the characters. Well, people they feel
Yeah,
like characters sometimes as you're going through the book, but the experiences that they're having, the stressors that they're facing. So it's really cool
absolutely.
that we have that kind of inner monologue going on in the story too. So, as you're doing all of this research, obviously there's a lot. How do you manage it all? How do you balance it, keep track of everything, and then have it in a way that's useful to you when you go to write?
Yeah. And some of that's practice. I'm definitely better at it now than I was with my first book. I mean, wrote my first book on just sheer panic of, like trying to take all these notes and like remember where the notes were. There are great resource managers. I use Zotero, which is an open source, just free resource manager, and you can put all of the bibliographic information into it. And if it's a link online, you just press a button. It's just an add-in for Chrome, I think I have it on right now, where, the web page will, immediately down to Zotero, download to Zotero, the author, the title of the article, the publishing date, all the information that you need. But you can also take notes in that too, so that not only can I search the articles and the books that I've read and the authors that I've read, but I can go through and search my own notes and say, I know this had something to do about a boat. I think the boat was black and white and red, and so I can just search for boat, black, white, and red, and hopefully my notes, will pop up at that point. Luckily, I think pretty consistently, so whatever I'm thinking, whatever I'm thought process where I'm taking the notes is generally what my brain goes to when I want to think back to that. So it's just a matter of putting in the same words. I think it would be a lot harder if I was trying to, go off of someone else's notes. It's a lot of organization and it's practice. It is a lot of practice. I've certainly gotten more efficient at it as I've written more books.
That's good. That's helpful with all
Yeah.
of the information that you're balancing. What is it that you that draws you to this particular age group to write for?
Yeah, my editor and I have some really great conversations about this because um, I feel bad admitting it, but a lot of adult nonfiction is very boring to me. It gets very into the weeds, where, you want to know about journalism and all of a sudden you're, reading about, papyrus in ancient Egypt and the development of paper and like all of that's like relevant, kind of. You can see how the author got there, but sometimes you just want the story. Sometimes you just want more concentrated story. And I think for myself, that's what I like to read. And so that's part of why I write what I do. I think that's a big part of it actually, is that this is the story that I want to read, adult or child, me now versus me when I was 12. I think this is what I would want to read as nonfiction. Um, so a lot of it is, just what appeals to me rather than trying to think of what appeals to a kid even.
That makes sense. And
Mhm.
along those lines, now this is your second book featuring World War II. Is there a specific draw to you about this period in history?
Um, I think I like it. I think it's a very popular time in history for everyone. World War II books are always, there's always an audience for them. There's always a readership. There's always people clamoring to know more about them. Um, and I think part of that is because there's such a good delineation of good guys and bad guys. It's very, very easy to say Nazis bad, us good. You solve a lot of there's no gray area there. So you can get on with telling whatever story it is. It's helpful to have a very obvious bad guy and a very obvious good guy. Um, and I think the other reason is that just we don't today agree on a lot across the country. And I think the idea of an entire country, an entire section of the world coming together to fight one thing, I think there's something very earnest, very admirable, that still draws me to that idea of just what everyone was willing to give up. The people, the characters, I do that too. They're characters in this book. They're not soldiers. They were never drafted. They were never told to, go fight in the war, but they did. And that was something that not only they did, but everyone around them was doing. Um, and that's very admirable. And I like thinking about that. So seeing the way everyone came together is powerful.
Absolutely. And the fact that it doesn't matter if you're on the front lines or cracking codes or
Yep,
getting secret information, that everyone participates in the same end goal.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there a favorite person that you researched for this book or a favorite moment within the book that you would like
Yeah.
to?
That's hard because it's not cherries and sunshine and roses and chocolates. It was a very hard book to write. I like seeing the relationships between the characters develop. I really like how there are two characters, Johann, they call him Johnny Jebsen, and Dusko Popov. And they were friends before the start of the book, and seeing how the two of them play off of one another as the story develops, how they influence each other. That was interesting to get to write, and I think that's the best I can use as interesting because it was also very difficult to write. Um, I don't know if we really want to do a whole bunch of spoilers, but
We don't have to do
yeah,
that.
we won't get into it too much. Their relationship was also difficult to write. But it really drew me in, as an author writing the story.
So this is, I would say, at least reading it, feels like a middle grade, maybe advanced middle grade into YA. Is that the readership that you had in mind for this book?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's different for every child. It really comes down to each child. There's certainly no, I was going to say language in it. There's no swearing. There's no, um, questionable language. There is a decent bit of violence. So I think that I would have been able to intellectually understand and read this book far before I was emotionally ready for it. So something like that I think is up to each person who is reading it. Otherwise I'd say, certainly there's nothing in here that, fourth or fifth graders can't handle, but I do think that each reader should be cognizant of just it's not a nice time in history.
Yeah, that helps. And, these people really went through these experiences, and sometimes you're ready to read about that, and sometimes you're not. And
Exactly. Yeah.
it's good to note. What is it that you hope readers come away with after they engage with this book?
Yeah. And you touched on this earlier a little bit, is that courage comes in all forms. World War II was fought on the battlefield, but there was so much heroism and so much bravery, and it really took everyone. It took a whole generation, whether you were fighting on the field, whether you were, working at home, or whether you were, trying to do what you could, like the spies did, in your own way, using whatever skill sets you had to defeat the Nazis, to defeat Hitler. So I think the readers, if they could come away with it from the idea that courage takes many forms, you don't have to be a soldier holding a gun to show courage, and that your bravery, however you show it, is absolutely necessary in defeating evil. That the Nazis were defeated, evil was not, and we'll all come across it in our lives. So, however you face it, wherever you are, you can be brave. You don't have to be a soldier to be brave. So I hope readers see that in the story.
Yeah, that's a really powerful message for readers of all ages, really. What made you decide to become a writer? And a writer
Yeah.
specifically that is not engineering writing?
Well, it's surprising. So I love talking to students. Like I love doing school visits and author visits and talking to students, because the writing actually isn't that different than engineering. So I went to school. I went to a bunch of school. I ended up going to get my master's degree, did a bunch of research, and the research you do, like whatever you find out as an engineer, doesn't mean anything until you tell it to other people. And so the way engineers and scientists do that is that they write journal articles, and anyone all over the world can read these articles. But the language that you use is very specialized to journals. Like it's very formal and very stilted and it's not interesting at all to read. But you end up having characters and setting and conflict. Something's broken or something doesn't work right or people are sick. Like there's always a conflict. There's always a place it's happening, whether it's in a hospital or in a lab or, even in a computer. You can do, experiments just in your computer and simulations. And there are always characters, and sometimes the characters are people, and sometimes they're real people, like we were talking about. But in my own engineering experience, I've had to look at broken cars, and so the people in that case, the characters become cars. And I worked with football players, and so my characters were football players in that. So engineering really isn't that different from a story when you come down to it. It's really just framing it a little bit differently than I think most people are used to. So by the time I got done with my master's degree, I was so comfortable writing the story of engineering, um, and realizing too that the books that I wanted to read weren't available. They certainly weren't available as a kid. They are much better now. I think nonfiction has come such a long way since I was a kid. I remember being, I don't know, upper elementary school, I must have been, and wanting to learn more about black holes. I was just, black holes are awesome. They're still awesome. They were awesome then, they're awesome now. And my library was a pretty good library. Like we had a really well stocked, well done library, but they had picture books about black holes and then they had Stephen Hawking. And so there was nothing in there to bridge the gap for, what were you supposed to do between ages of like, 8 and 18. So again, it comes back to what I want to read. And so even though nonfiction has come so far since I was a kid, this is really a golden age of middle grade young adult nonfiction that we're in. Um, I want to be a part of that. I want to write books that I wanted to read then and books that I want to read now. So making the leap from what I was doing in engineering to, the type of books that I want to read and, want to be around now, um, it doesn't seem that big to me. I will admit most people do kind of look at me pretty oddly when I say what the whole journey has been, but I don't think it's that odd when you think about it in a certain way.
Yeah. So, in light of that, for anyone listening who is interested in writing or maybe doesn't have the books yet that they want to read, what
Mhm.
advice would you give to them?
Well, it's harder if you don't have the books you want to read because my first advice is always to read. I actually hated writing as a kid, which is part of the reason I ended up in engineering. But I always loved reading. I think it's much more important to read than it is to write, especially for the first couple decades of life. I mean, just read everything you can get your hands on. Nonfiction, fiction, poetry, the back of cereal boxes, like just read. That's going to show you what you like, what you don't like. You're going to start to understand what authors do well, how they can do it better, what you want to see, what you're not seeing, what you think should be there. You don't need to go and tell the story of Goldilocks for the 57th time, but if you can find a way to, again, like history, look at it a little bit differently, then you've got a story that other people want to find out too. They want to read this because it's different and it's a little bit new. But to know that you have to read, you have to know what is missing and what's out there. Um, and if you don't have books around you, that does get harder. So anytime you can tell stories, whether you can tell them to another person, whether you can write them down, whether you make it up in your own head and, push yourself. If they're, the stories you usually tell, maybe you love telling stories about unicorns. Maybe this time tell a story about a robot, you know. So read everything you can get your hands on, and then when you do start writing, or if you don't have books to read, challenge yourself to write something that maybe you would never think of writing because you'll learn something from it. Maybe you'll learn that you love it. Maybe you'll learn that you really do hate it, but you'll always learn something from it.
That ongoing learning is always something important, no matter how old you are.
Absolutely.
So now that Double Crossed is kind of on its way into the world, do you have other projects that you're working on that you are comfortable talking about?
I do actually. So my next nonfiction is not announced yet, but that will be coming. There are definitely plans for more nonfiction. And my debut fiction is actually going to come out spring of 2027. I always have to think about that. It seems when we're talking in the fall of 25, it still seems so far away, but it's coming up. And so I'm excited to do that. Again, it's something different for me. This will be my first fiction, young adult rather than YA, but historical fiction going back to World War One, and how the suffragist movement and World War One play off each other. So really excited for that. Really excited for that, and excited for the upcoming nonfiction as well.
Well, that sounds exciting. And I imagine you probably did some research for this as well. Is that true?
Oh my gosh, all the time. At this point, I don't know how people go through their lives without doing research. It's just such a core, core part of my life.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds awesome. I'm excited to read it too.
Thank you.
So, Rebecca, I've asked you a lot of questions today, but what is the question that I did not ask you that you wish I had?
Let's see here. Oh man. All right. Well, something that doesn't make it into the book, right? We talk about keeping the book interesting, and my editor and I talk a lot about pacing and how we have to, kind of keep the book moving, which unfortunately means we cut a lot of stuff that would be nice to keep in. And so while Double Crossed is the story of the deception campaign, oh goodness, around D-Day, there was a lot else that the Allies were doing in terms of lying to Hitler throughout the war. And one of the things that I really wish had gotten into the book, really wish I'd gotten into the book, didn't make it in, was that at one point, British intelligence decided to spread the rumor, the lie, that they had bought 200 man-eating sharks from Australia and were populating the English Channel with it, so that they were trying to decrease the German fighter pilots. They were trying to decrease pilots who would want to fly over the English Channel. Because if they crashed, then these sharks would allegedly come and get them. That never happened, but I always think that's a really good story. So I'm sorry that didn't make it into the book.
A chance for someone else to pick it up and write a book about that. I
There you
can't
go.
believe the things that they came up with. That's remarkable.
Yep.
That's awesome. Well, Rebecca, where can folks go to learn more about you and your books and what's coming next?
Sure. So the best place is probably my website, which is really easy. It's all one, Rebecca E.F. Barone, RebeccaEFBarone.com. That has links to all my social media, that has the upcoming books, that has links to Goodreads and places to buy them. I love talking to students. It has contact information there for me if I can come and talk to students and do author visits. Um, so all that information's on there, and I update it pretty regularly. So that's a great place to start.
Fantastic. Listeners, if Double Crossed or any of Rebecca E.F. Barone's other books sound like great fits for you, I hope you look for them wherever you get your books. And thank you again, Rebecca. I really appreciate you taking the time with me today.
Thanks so much, Mary. I've loved talking with you.